Welcome to FAR 432 Video Production Module 4, Fibonacci and the Golden Ratio in Nature, Art, and Composition. I think you're going to find this very interesting. This is one of the more fascinating areas in art and in culture and in beauty and in composition, and it's something that I think you really should know and I think you'll enjoy. The hero of our story is a character by the name of Leonardo of Pisa, son of Fibonacci. And in the Italian, Filius Bonacci means son of Bonacci, and it got shortened to Fibonacci. So he was really named Leonardo of Pisa, and not to be confused with Leonardo da Vinci, who was born about 200 years later. But Fibonacci is important because from his studies in North Africa, he had picked up Arabic numbers and numerals and some of the studies of mathematics and other things from the East and from Africa, and he introduced them to the West. In about 1202 AD, he introduced what is known as the Fibonacci series or sequence and the zero. All of this is very important for us even today. The Fibonacci numbers is important for art, and of course the zero is important for technology. It's the basis of our digital system, and interestingly enough, Fibonacci gave us the basis of our digital computer systems with the zero, and the Fibonacci series has very important implications for the arts. Much of what we consider beautiful in art comes from our experience of nature, and in particular the experience of certain patterns and certain ratios. There is a certain mathematics of beauty, and we're going to look into that. First, I wanted to show you a couple of websites that I think are important for this, particularly a couple by Dr. Ron Knott, and we're going to take a look at that right now. The interesting thing about these various patterns that you could find in nature, and that Fibonacci outlined in his work, the Liber Abaci, was that there are these patterns, and that they tend to occur all over the place in nature, and particularly have an effect of being beautiful, attractive. They're very attractive to our senses, and this is important for the visual arts, particularly for film and video, when you begin to see the relationship of these ratios and patterns, particularly the Fibonacci numbers and the golden ratio. The golden ratio is actually a fraction like pi. They also call it phi. And we're going to look at it a little bit more here, but this is the website I had mentioned to you, and I'm going to go down it and point out a few things so that you can understand what Fibonacci had pointed out. One of the famous connections was the breeding patterns of rabbits. This was one of the places where the Fibonacci numbers were very apparent in terms of pairs and how reproduction occurred, since rabbits reproduce very quickly. And the numbers that you see that appear are 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. These are the Fibonacci numbers. And you're going to see these same numbers appearing all over the place. And we'll go on further and I'll show you some more examples. The Fibonacci numbers, as they get higher and higher, approach a more perfect version of what is called the golden ratio, the golden number. And that golden ratio is roughly 1 to 1.6, and it appears in all kinds of places in nature and is very attractive to the eye, and you're going to see some forms that you've probably seen before. But essentially the Fibonacci numbers are a numerical approximation of the golden ratio, and yet nature uses the Fibonacci numbers. They occur just as readily as the ratio of phi, which is kind of interesting. You're going to see as we go along that the Fibonacci numbers are basically related to the golden numbers, and here we see on this website Fibonacci rectangles and shell spirals. This is important to us because the video screen, like the one you see here, is a rectangle, and within it occur natural expressions of the golden ratio and of Fibonacci implication. And we're going to look at that a little more in just a second. Of particular interest are the various spirals and spiral formations, because they often are in this golden ratio. The chambers that you see associated with these nautilus shells, this is a side section of the nautilus shell. Each chamber is in a golden ratio to the next chamber. The Fibonacci numbers also relate to the growth of plants, and so again they're part of a natural sequence that we see all the time. We're just not conscious of it. Again, as you can see in this website, flowers are broken down into these ratios. You can find them all over the place in various natural, beautiful contexts. Literally, the number and pattern and the way that leaves and petals develop follows these numbers. And they notice this stuff, and of course Fibonacci was one of the first to present it to the West. Many of these ideas had been around in the East and ancient Africa and in the Middle East and in India and so forth, but really it was Fibonacci who brought it to us in Europe. The spiral patterns that you see in sunflowers and other flowers are also in these beautiful golden spirals, golden ratio spirals. And interestingly enough, I have seen diagrams of the rods and cones of the eye, the human eye, and they also seem to be very much like this, such that our own perception, our own eyes, seem to resonate to these patterns. And that's one of the reasons why many believe that this is the source of their beautiful effect, that literally we're in tune with these things. And we'll also make that connection with music as well in just a little bit. Here we see pine cones displayed in this website. They also develop in a Fibonacci sequence. The growth of leaves on various plants, matter of fact probably most plants, follow a very direct connection to the Fibonacci sequence. Probably one of the most dramatic examples of this pattern or sequences in this braca flower, these beautiful spiraling patterns, and as I say, there's something about them that is fascinating to the eye, almost hypnotic in their effect. And as I said, just as we find these patterns in nature, you will also find them in art, architecture, and music. And we're going to look at a few examples again from this same basic website. Many of the ancients knew about these ratios, the ancient Greeks and of course the Egyptians and throughout the East. And it's expressed in architecture, and here we see some diagrams of the Acropolis and the front view of the Acropolis. And again, I want you to keep in mind that because television and film is a rectangular window, that things that fit into that window are in essence an example of how things can be broken down into golden ratios as well. We're going to look at that some more in just a minute. On this page I've accumulated several different directions that you can look at here. I want to point out that the famous drawing that was done by Da Vinci here is something you've probably seen before, but maybe you didn't realize that it was actually the demonstration of the golden ratio in the human form. Basically, the ratio is related to the Fibonacci numbers, which can be more easily broken down to something like a 3 to 5 or 5 to 8 ratio, borrowing from the Fibonacci numbers down at the bottom of the page here, such that the distance between the navel here and the the top of the head is roughly a 5 to 8 ratio. Something like what you're seeing over here in the spiral here. And we're going to look at some of these things. And there again is our Braca flower. And you can see the golden ratio broken down in this rectangle, which is a little bit closer to our 9 by 16 format that we're using now in television. And so these forms are important to understand, and as I say, you're going to basically hopefully learn how to compose these various forms in the way that you shoot your videos, and hopefully some of this will influence you in a positive way. Not that I'm asking you to basically do art by numbers, but numbers are certainly important in getting started. And then you can develop your own style of producing these things. Picture here above me is an example of, these are two variations of the same GIF, one horizontally oriented, one vertically oriented, where you can see the Fibonacci numbers turning into the golden ratio spiral and being related to the nautilus shell. And that nautilus shell is not only the only place where you see that particular spiral, you see it all over the place, even in the spirals of galaxies in space. Basically, the ancients believed that these were, in a sense, a signature of God, if you want. This was considered to be very big stuff, and it was enough to inspire many people to very religious feelings, that essentially there was something infinite and perfect in the way that these ratios worked. And as I say, not only were they important in architecture and in art and the visual arts, but also in music. And of course, no good discussion of the golden ratio would be allowed without some discussion of the pyramids. Of course, you know the pyramids are full of all kinds of fascinating connections, and here you can see a diagram of how the golden ratio is applied to the formation and the shape of the pyramids. Following in the same African theme, there was an expert who presented a book at Southern SUNO in New Orleans, Ron Englash, and I had gotten a very nice copy of his book. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in the Katrina floods. But I invite you to look at this if you're interested. It's called African Fractals, and it's a study of the golden ratio and other fractal implications in African culture. And what I have showing above me is a face broken down into golden ratios, a profile broken down into golden ratios, and essentially what's pointed out there is that these things are a real source of beauty and harmony and a visual delight. And as I mentioned, you have to understand the presence of the golden ratio in music. Interestingly enough, probably some of the most beautiful sounds produced in music are in Fibonacci and golden ratios. But not only there, you also see it even in the pattern of the keyboard. The keyboard has 5 black notes, 8 white notes, and when you add them all together from octave to octave, you get 13. Those are 3 of the first of the Fibonacci numbers. So even the breakdown of our musical scales break down in this fashion. And there's a work called Fascinating Fibonacci's, which also you might want to look at. Again, this is all part of understanding some of the underpinnings of composition in the arts. This is also true even in the shapes of musical instruments. The violin and all of its variations are also broken down into Fibonacci and Phi or golden ratio patterns. Other examples of playing around with the Fibonacci and golden ratios can be seen here in the upper left-hand corner. This was a model of the forces influencing the planets that was developed by Kepler back hundreds of years ago. This was another breakdown of the golden ratio in relation to the human face that Da Vinci did. Here we have a sculpture from Israel that is broken down into Fibonacci numbers. And of course, probably one of the most famous ones you can see here is the pentacle itself. Pentacles are a perfect example of the golden ratio. The ratio of the long part of the leg here to the short part of the leg here is in the golden ratio, the 1 to 1.6, or roughly approximated by Fibonacci numbers, a 5 to 8 ratio. At another website that I am going to include with your basic package, you can see the Fibonacci numbers associated with the ratios, and as you look at it, you'll see that as they approach infinity, they come closer and closer to the perfect expression of phi. But as I mentioned to you, this expression is an amazing expression of virtually the infinite in the finite, and this is where art and beauty and mysticism sometimes could be thought to come together. And as I said, many of the ancients thought that the Fibonacci numbers and the golden ratio were virtually like God's signature in nature. And so it's something for those of you who are perhaps religious that you might want to look into it from that standpoint. Those who are not should be excited at just the fact that this is an amazing kind of underpinning, an amazing pattern that can be seen just about everywhere you turn around, from genetics to the patterns of our nerves and elsewhere, and of course in video and film arts. It's demonstrated here on this website that even the spacing of the rings of Saturn appear to follow the golden ratio, as you can see in the lines that are outlined, the difference, the lengths of the various points, one to the other. In another website devoted to interactive math as relates to beauty, again you can see Da Vinci's drawing broken down and showing of that same ratio broken down here. There's also an interesting study of the face, which I'm going to show you now. In this website, they actually have taken the human face and broken it down into a golden ratio pattern, and then superimposed that golden ratio pattern over characters. This is Jessica Simpson. They also have one of Tom Cruise, where you can actually insert this pattern, this mask, over the character's face. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but I invite you to go and play with this stuff. It is fun. It's interesting to see how it relates, but you can basically see that as the face approaches the golden ratio patterns, it tends to be more attractive and handsome, so it's a fun study. And again, of course, this particular site goes into some of these other things as well. I highly recommend that you look into this and check out how that works. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to relate it to what we've already looked at in some of the shots, the kinds of shots that we've covered. In this shot here that we had looked at originally in our second handout, this was a close-up shot that was broken up into the 3:4 ratio. If I superimposed some of the key golden ratios onto the form, this would be what it would look like. Now the idea, sometimes it's called the law of thirds, but really educated people should know and understand that it's basically the golden ratio they're talking about here. But these spots that I'm circling here with my hand there, these spots are basically what you'd call sweet spots. And here we have it in 9:16, and If I superimpose the golden ratio on this, this is what you see in that same close-up. What you're noticing here is that these points, these intersection points, are in that Fibonacci ratio, roughly a 5 to 8, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, 8 to 13. You can take those numbers however you want, or basically it's 1 to 1.6 ratio. And in this case, I've outlined 4 hot spots, and these are really the sweet spots. Whether you're dealing in the 3:4 ratio, these are sweet spots. These are spots in which you want your compositions to be heavily focused on, so that when people are shooting these various shots, this is something that goes on. And as I say, initially you're basically doing this by numbers, but as you get further on into your development, you're going to be doing this naturally, and you'll develop your own style. And this is where it'll become your art and not just drawing by numbers. This can also be related to composition of the medium shot. Again, here I have the sweet spots outlined. This particular shot I borrowed from the clip art and is not necessarily the most perfect. I might have put her over a little bit further this way so that the sweet spot here would be closer to her mouth. But it's basically the idea. You can see what we're getting at here. In the long shot that we saw before, you can see exactly that the line, the place that was positioning of the character in the long shot was directly in this column, this column here. If we do an imaginary line through our figure, and that the action is really focusing around this point here. But also in the distance, you see the mountain in the distance is also composed pretty much in a key point. So that when you compose your shots, you want to keep in mind that if you can hit these ratios, these golden and Fibonacci ratios, you're going to produce a more attractive picture. Our eyes and our brains are really tuned to these ratios. They really have an impact on us. So in summary, basically, because in film and in video we're dealing with a rectangle, this rectangle is important, and of course the ratios that work within those rectangles are important. And so the outer rectangle we have focused on. Now we're focusing on composition within that rectangle, and the most ideal one is the golden ratio, and the other way of looking at it is through the numerical approximation of Fibonacci numbers. It's an easier way to think of it than having to deal with the fractions of 1 to 1.6, which is what the phi ratio is. But you should know both. You should understand that they are essentially related, and that nature uses both, and that they occur all over the place in nature. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I invite you to go to these websites that we've looked at, and I want you to explore them, and I'll be talking to you again soon. This is the end of Module 4.